The State of Crypto is presented by Tron, connecting the world to the power of cryptocurrency.
According to CryptoQuant, spot Bitcoin ETF approvals in the U.S. could add 1 trillion, that's with a T, to crypto's total market cap. Joining us now to discuss the crypto market is MV Capital CIO and partner Tom Dunleavy. Welcome, Tom.
Thanks for having me.
Glad to see you. So the report also from CryptoQuant also said that Bitcoin could become a $900 billion asset if the approval happens. Gott in Himmel, that's a lot of money. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so we saw as soon as the fake news came out, we had a 10% pop in Bitcoin. Some people immediately saw through that, called it fraud. The thing that really raised my antenna was that we only saw one ETF reportedly approved, right? We've had numerous indications that when this ETF eventually does get approved, we're going to have all 10 or 11 get approved at the same time. We don't want, Gary Gensler and the SEC, while they're fighting against this, they certainly don't want to be a kingmaker for just one ETF on top of the numerous other problems they've had. So we had that 10% pop. That was mostly algorithmic driven, right? As soon as it hit Twitter, you had algos buying that stuff, buying Bitcoin immediately. And then as soon as discretionary traders sussed that out, it retraced. So, my base case is that when this actually does happen, we're going to see a pop more than 10%, likely 20%. And why is that, right? What does this really give us? Really, when you're creating an ETF, you have to quote unquote seed the ETF. So you have to purchase a set amount of dollars to have it facilitate liquidity for the ETF. So you have 10 or 11. Usually when you seed an ETF, it's $25 to $100 million. So that's spot buying of Bitcoin in something in the range of $500 million to $1 billion if you aggregate all that through all those approvals. We got this pop without that actual purchasing power that we're going to have when these things are actually approved. So, I think this was just a foreshadowing of what's to come.
So $500 to $1 billion is what you're estimating will go in. Over what time period are you thinking this will happen? And what would be the point that you would say it didn't succeed or it did succeed? What's the dividing line there?
Yeah, so this certainly will take some time, right? They're going to be approved. There's going to be a period where the ETFs have to ramp up. They have to get listed on exchanges. It's a few months process. But, if you think about the Bitcoin market today, even a $10 million, $20 million buy is very meaningful for price action, right? Across exchanges, you don't have a huge amount of volume. So even across a few months, $500 million to $1 billion is a very meaningful amount. The other thing I would say is that now that these things are approved, you have the incentive for the $1 trillion+ dollar advisor community to incentivize their clients to do this. Previously, and why is that, right? Previously, they had no incentive. If you had your assets on Coinbase or something like that, and they tried to build you a efficient portfolio, they wouldn't get any fees for that. But now they can say, okay, if you want to entertain your crypto fantasies, right, I'll buy 1 to 5% position for you in this new Bitcoin ETF. And I'm going to get a fee on that now. I'm going to get my 1%. So I'm more incentivized now to do it. So you're going to have a huge influx from that advisor community as well, which should be very meaningful for price action and to sort of the early part of next year. So a few months, but just constant buying pressure from numerous outlets.
Spot Bitcoin ETFs exist in other parts of the world. What do you think will make the US one so different to really affect the markets in ways that we haven't seen ETFs do yet?
Yeah, so the U.S. markets are certainly the biggest in the world. It's the biggest equity markets in the world, and we're the biggest consumers in the world by a very large margin, right? I think the only ones that I know of that are approved are in Canada or Europe, which are, if you just compare the equity sizes of the U.S. and those investors are meaningfully different. I would also say the risk appetite of the U.S. investor is traditionally much higher than other countries. So I think people want exposure to this. They just need a reasonable way to do it without having to go to numerous venues, jump through too many hoops, and really just get that regulatory stamp of approval, right? Like if these things are finally sanctioned and investors understand that they're under SEC mandates and they don't have that regulatory risk of, overhang, right? There's going to be a much more meaningful reason to allocate to a position to Bitcoin or others.
We've had a lot of people on the show kind of talking as if this Bitcoin ETF is just like a foregone conclusion. Like, is there any chance that this is just not going to happen, actually? Because, anything could happen, right? I feel like we've reached this sort of consensus that, this is coming and, everyone get prepared. I mean, there's probably some chance that, people will be completely disappointed that this won't happen at all, right?
Yeah, I was speaking with James Seifert from Bloomberg the other day, who follows this stuff very closely, along with Eric Balchunas, and they put the likelihood at 90%. They're in the weeds with all this documentation, and the next deadline, I think, is early January. The SEC would have to jump through a number of hoops to sort of push that date forward, or they would have to present essentially a new case, new merits why this wouldn't be approved. And that would be very challenging for a number of reasons. So, I certainly trust the experts here that this will likely get pushed forward early next year, if not sooner. Right? There's also the black swan likelihood that they could approve these before that deadline. So, in terms of positioning, it's been the theme of the market has been chop and apathy. We're on all-time lows and trading volume on centralized exchanges. Gas fees on Ethereum and others are at all-time lows. Daily active addresses are down. So the only sort of bright spot that everyone's hoping for is that Bitcoin ETF right now. And I think it really could catalyze the environment again. So, positioning ahead of that, I think, is really important. And folks are doing it. If you look at, people have been waiting all year. Bitcoin has outperformed Ethereum by, over 10-20% this year. The ETH BTC ratio is moved dramatically. So people are positioning for this, and I think it's, in my opinion, and the opinion of a lot of experts I talk to, it seems like almost a foregone conclusion at this point.
Yeah, I mean, people have been waiting their whole lives, at least in crypto. I guess it's really interesting though, just in terms of the larger regulatory environment, because there's this thing that's Hail Mary for crypto, this could save the industry, but all the other regulatory signs in the US are kind of negative. And then you have this very high profile trial going on, which is just, not painting crypto in the most beautiful light, let's say, So, I mean, do you think are they just completely divorced from one another? Because you really have, I'm talking about the FTX trial, which is just very unpleasant, and crypto does not look good. And there's all sorts of vague talk and explicit talk of market manipulation, right? So you would see this as not being a very productive trend toward, having a Bitcoin ETF. So what's the connection between these two? Or it's just people not paying attention? It just doesn't matter. I don't know.
Yeah, it's really tough, right? And is there some sort of trial going on? I didn't realize there's no. It's been a real black eye for the industry. And honestly, if you just look at all of the on-chain volumes, as I mentioned earlier, I think that's playing into that. People just don't want to be associated with this right now. So just having this FTX trial eventually behind us is going to clean everything up, which will be fantastic. The black swan obviously is anything that is associated with Binance, which I still think is really challenging to sort of handicap that. And they've been around in the industry for a while, been a really strong player. But if there were some issues there, that would be a real challenge for the industry. But you have very well-regulated players like Coinbase and Kraken and others who drive a ton of volumes, especially in the U.S. market, that are very transparent. So we could audit those numbers. There's no black box there that we have to worry about. I will add, I'm starting to see not only interest, from the public side as we get to this Bitcoin ETF and the spot buying with BTC, but I spend a lot of my time now, obviously, on the private side, being a venture fund, and there's been a huge influx of new companies that are being launched at very reasonable valuations. 5 to 10x the amount of companies I've seen kind of earlier in the year. So, I think that usually leads the market, right? You're having a lot of interesting, smart companies being launched right now and raising capital that will hopefully drive that next cycle. And I think they're really trying to front run a lot of what's going to potentially happen early next year as we get to that Bitcoin ETF.
We recently learned that Fidelity amended their spot Bitcoin ETF filing along with a few others. What does this tell you? Does this tell you that an approval could be on the horizon or that they're engaging with regulators? Is this a positive?
Certainly a positive. I think there's going to be a lot of tweaks in all of those ETF applications, and everyone just wants to make sure they're ready to get that stamp as soon as, the SEC approves, right? I think there's 11 ETFs currently in the process, right? If someone doesn't have their ducks in a row and say maybe 7 of those 11 do, they're going to get the flows. And you saw this with gold and the GLD ETF that literally dominates the market because it was the first one that was approved. Everyone just puts their flows there, and that is an enormous moneymaker for that house. So, they just want to make those little tweaks. I don't see it as super meaningful. Maybe others do, but it's just another buyer in the market in terms of this Bitcoin ETF suite that we have coming.
Tom, thanks for that. It was quite insightful. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thanks, guys. Always good to be here.
That was MV Capital CIO and partner Tom Dunleavy.